Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something super fascinating. We're going to explore how seemingly totally unrelated global events are actually deeply interconnected threads that weave together to affect our daily lives, our economies, and yep, even our local housing markets. If you've ever wondered how geopolitical shifts in South Asia could possibly share the same macroeconomic DNA as the US housing market, well, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to decode the macro trends shaping 2026. And by the end of this explainer, I promise you, the global economy is going to look a whole lot smaller and a lot more connected.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. We're going to kick things off with global trade and supply, then look at labor, migration, and demographics. From there, we'll cover climate risk and insurance, check out the 2026 real estate market, and finally, wrap up with resilience in the future. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. Global Trade and Supply. Interconnected Markets.
It's so easy to just look at our local economies in a vacuum, right? But the reality is much more interconnected. No local market actually functions completely on its own, so we really need to use a macro lens to view how global supply chains dictate domestic realities. It's kind of like a giant puzzle. For example, look at the massive $10 billion trade relationship between India and Bangladesh. Bangladesh's booming export-oriented garment industry is fundamentally reliant on Indian machinery, raw materials, and energy just to function, but that trade balance is heavily skewed. Now flip over to the North American construction industry and we see a very similar parallel. U.S. builders are desperately fighting to secure cost-effective materials, relying heavily on the USMCA, that's the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, to avoid steep tariffs. In both of these cases, a disruption across a border means an immediate price hike for the end consumer.
This constant push and pull of cross-border movement is universal. Whether we're talking about South Asian border HOTS, which are these vibrant local markets designed to promote legal trade and cultural interaction, or the critical supply lines right here in North America, the pressure points are exactly the same. Case in point, the U.S. construction market is currently bracing for the January 15, 2025 deadline for the International Longshoremen's Association port negotiations. If those negotiations fail, well, that supply disruption will ripple through the economy just as swiftly as a sudden border closure would in South Asia.
Moving on to Section 2, Labor, Migration, and Demographics, the human element.
We really can't talk about moving goods without talking about the people who make, move, and buy them. Labor shortages drive policy and pricing everywhere. Take India and Bangladesh. They share a porous 4,000-kilometer border that sees massive informal labor migration. Indian agriculture and construction sectors really benefit from this labor, while Bangladesh relies heavily on the resulting remittances sent back home. But this economic disparity also drives complex political responses, like Assam's National Register of Citizens, which aims to address unauthorized migration. Now compare that to the U.S., a formal, highly regulated market. Yet, construction unemployment is sitting at a mere 3.9%. That is basically full employment, folks. With an aging workforce retiring out of the trades, there is a desperate need for craft labor. And to attract the workers needed just to build homes, the industry is being forced to raise wages at a much higher pace than normal. And you guessed it, that drives up the cost of every single new home built.
So who exactly are they building these homes for? Well, domestic real estate is being entirely rewritten by changing demographics right now. We're seeing smaller household sizes because of lower birth rates, and notably, a really strong rise in single female homebuyers. But the real heavyweight champions of the current market? The baby boomers. With massive housing wealth accumulated over decades, retirees are trading homes, often entirely in cash, bypassing the mortgage market completely. In fact, right now, just a quarter of homebuyers actually have children. Wild, right?
Jessica Louts, the deputy chief economist at the National Association of Realtors, really hit the nail on the head here. She said they are not making many concessions on their home choices, and they have the funds to really make those choices. That quote completely humanizes the data for us. Because they have the cash, boomers are not making concessions. They're buying exactly what they want, exactly where they want it, and they are dominating the housing market. That makes it uniquely challenging for first-time buyers who are dependent on financing to even compete.
Section 3, Climate Risk and Insurance. The cost of nature.
Okay, so we've talked about supply and we've talked about labor. Now we have to factor in the environment. It's a massive macro dilemma we all face. How is climate change reshaping our economies and our wallets? Think about it. Just as river erosion and flooding routinely displace thousands along the India-Bangladesh border, forcing environmental migration and intense economic strain, severe weather in the U.S. is fundamentally reshaping your cost of living. The global climate reality is hitting local wallets incredibly hard.
$31 billion. Let that staggering number sink in for a second. That represents total U.S. roof claims in 2024 alone,
which is actually up 30% since 2022. Because of this, insurers are no longer just looking at your zip code. They are heavily scrutinizing the exact age and condition of the roof over your head.
The average premium for a new policy has ballooned to a massive $1,952. But, as you can see, the pain is definitely not distributed equally. States like Colorado and Texas are facing a literal perfect storm of escalating wildfire exposures, severe convective storms, and rising reconstruction costs. Georgia tops the list with an absolutely incredible 28.4% premium increase. It is a prime example of how local climate exposure and state regulations directly dictate your monthly housing costs.
And this all builds into our 2026 insurance realities. Insurers are basically shifting the risk directly onto the homeowner. Average deductibles rose 22%. Why? Because of perils like severe convective storms in the Midwest and Southeast, which caused $42 billion in insured losses by September 2025. And remember that roof scrutiny? Notice there is a $155 premium gap just for having a roof that is 11 to 15 years old. Perhaps most alarmingly, in high-risk states like California, Florida, and Texas, standard coverage is getting so scarce that 16% of policies are now forced into the much less regulated excess and surplus, or E&S market. Ultimately, this means fewer consumer protections and significantly higher, much more volatile costs just to secure basic coverage.
All right, Section 4, the 2026 real estate market, unlocking inventory.
So, how do supply chain issues, labor shortages, and skyrocketing insurance costs synthesize in the housing market? Well, financial conditions are finally shifting. We're actually projecting a 14% increase in U.S. home sales for 2026. After years of a deeply frozen market where homeowners were locked into those super low pandemic-era rates, the ice is finally beginning to thaw.
And here is the crazy math behind that thaw. According to NAR economists, dropping mortgage rates from 7% down to 6% expands the pool of households who can qualify to buy by 5.5 million. Even if only 10% of those newly qualified buyers actually go out and make a purchase, that injects 500,000 additional home sales right into the market. It is a massive wave of incoming demand.
But this incoming demand is hitting a market full of bizarre anomalies. Normally, new construction carries a premium, right? But right now, existing homes are actually more expensive than new builds because of aggressive builder incentives like price cuts and rate buydowns. Meanwhile, the middle class is getting squeezed tight, able to afford only 21% of available homes, which is way down from 50% pre-pandemic. To fix this structural deficit, economists note we have a desperate need to update zoning laws for medium-density housing, like townhomes. And geographically, buyers are fleeing the expensive coasts for the Midwest. Markets like Columbus, Indianapolis, and Kansas City are emerging as massive strongholds for affordability.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Resilience in the Future, Adapting to 2026.
So, with all these macro pressures coming at us, from global supply shocks to local climate threats, how on earth do we adapt? Across industries, whether it's global agriculture or domestic housing, the focus is really shifting toward leveraging behavioral science, data, and technology to build structural resilience. We are moving away from just reacting to disasters and moving toward proactively predicting and mitigating them.
This tech-driven resilience is already rolling out in a big way for 2026. The insurance industry is getting a massive high-tech makeover. Carriers are heavily utilizing drone and satellite imagery for incredibly accurate property-level underwriting. They're deploying AI systems to predict localized weather risks before they happen. We are even seeing proactive smart home tech like Nationwide's Ting system, which monitors your electrical grid to prevent fires before they ever start. And on the policy side, the National Flood Insurance Program is actually up for reauthorization in January, which is prompting some very urgent discussions on overhauling exactly how we federally manage climate risk.
I want to leave you with this question to chew on. We've seen how a labor shortage in South Asia mirrors a craft labor crisis in the US, and how global supply chain tariffs directly impact the cost of building a local home. We've seen how climate change dictates your monthly insurance premiums. As these sweeping global forces reshape our very own local neighborhoods, is your personal and financial strategy actually built to weather the storm in 2026? It's definitely a lot to think about. But understanding these interconnected threads is the absolutely crucial first step to being prepared. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.